Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 51, Celebrating the Nerd. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford, and today we're talking about the story told in the 2018 film Ready Player One. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing great, thank you. And how are you?
Doing well, thank you very much. And what's new in your writing world?
What's new in my writing world is what was new last time. Still just working on Zara 2, The Wrath of Sekhmet. Just working on the first draft of that. Also doing some small outlining stuff on other stories, more just like idea things at this point. But yeah, mostly focused on getting Zara 2 done. Yeah, I wish I had a more exciting update, but that's where I'm at. What are you working on?
I am continuing to work on the editing of the audiobook chapters for my Temporal Protection Course series. I'm on book 4, and I think I've got 8 chapters done. Anyway, I upload those to YouTube when they're completed so people can listen to them for free. And I'm also writing the second book in the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. That book is called Ecliptic, and I am nearing the end. I have 14,000 words left before I reach the end of this book. And right now I just finished the character who this book is mostly focused on. You know, this series is sort of like an ensemble series. It's a group of heroes, but each book I kind of focus on a different member of the group to some degree. And so this particular book's focus is a character named Fulgar, and Fulgar just had his dark night of the soul this morning. So he's going to come out of that and see what he learned.
That's cool. So each book is kind of, you still have the group, but your POV is different between the books.
Yeah, I mean, and I changed the POV for each chapter, but the focus is on a particular character.
Gotcha.
And that particular character's journey in the overall arc of the story. Now, am I successful at that? I don't know. I'm doing my best to, make that work. You know, we have a big arc for the whole series that's, galactic in nature, and then smaller arcs for the characters that relate to the actions that is taking place on a galactic stage. So, yeah. Anyway, that's what I've been working on.
Very cool. I love how you know that you have 14,000 words left. That's pretty good estimating there.
Well, I always aim for a certain number for my books. And my books are actually for science fiction on the short side, because I think people usually expect around 100,000 words for science fiction, and I'm usually around 75. I probably could do more.
Yeah, that's a good length, though.
I think it's a great length for a novel. I could probably do more description, and that's probably where I should think about it. Think about if I wanted to add more words, it would be in more description. I'm very focused on the characters, so usually it's the action and the character piece. But I could probably spend some time developing the worlds a little bit more, so that, for example, I have a family member who has, what is it called? Aphantasia. They don't have the ability to imagine things. They don't get pictures in their mind. And so for that person, I started adding a lot more detail so that they could get a better picture of what I was trying to.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that because I don't describe a whole lot. I kind of describe enough to get the setting.
Yeah.
I do very minimal description of characters, just kind of like main features that would make them stand out in
Yeah.
the world or amongst each other. Because I tend to prefer that reading. So
Yeah.
like let's my own mind fill in the blanks. But yeah, you're right. If someone has aphantasia or however you say that, then yeah, they probably could use more description. So maybe that's something I could bump up a little as well.
Yeah. And I do the same thing. I
Interesting.
actually prefer less description. I'm not a big fan of she turned her sky blue eyes on him and batted her honey colored eyelid. I'm not big into that, right? So I do the same thing. I just enough so that the person can stand out. You get a feel for how they are unique unto themselves from a visual perspective, and then I focus more on their actions and what they're doing. But I agree. I think there's a middle ground there that I think is helpful
Yeah.
to most people. And that's what I'm striving for. So
Yeah,
anyway,
that's good.
so as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon. And you can also read the first book in the Tales of Zara that Mike has released on both Kindle Vella and as Kindle ebook and paperback. And you have the second book on Villa. Is that also going out on Villa? I can't remember. I'm sorry.
It will, but it's not there yet. I want to
Okay.
get it to probably around beta level first.
Excellent. And so those books, you can look for the links in the show notes to be able to start reading those stories. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movie, and TV?
I watched the Showtime show Yellow Jackets. Have you seen that?
No, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's about these girls who are on a soccer team and they're flying up to play in a Nationals game, I think, and the plane crashes and they're stuck like out in the forest somewhere. And then they're trying to survive there, wait for help, and then weird things start happening. I guess it's sort of like a supernatural, maybe.
It was kind of like Lost.
Yeah, kind of like Lost in a way, but a lot less interesting.
Oh, that's too bad.
There's, I just kept waiting for something to happen. I actually stopped watching the show twice, and then I saw something talking about, oh, there's some supernatural thing that happens because it hadn't, like up to like 3 or 4 episodes. I'm like, okay, well maybe I'll give it another shot. So I gave it another shot, and it kind of, sort of something happened. It's sort of vague. Of like, is it supernatural or is it just like, that's an interpretation on events? I don't know. It gets interesting toward the end of the first season, so we'll see. I might pick up the second season when it comes out, but yeah, I wasn't hugely impressed with it. I think maybe I'm not the target audience. It's more teenage girls or something. I don't know. I don't know who the demographic is for it. Anyway, that's all I've been watching. Do you have something better to discuss?
Well, let's see. We finished Percy Jackson. Got to the end of the first season of that. I think it was really mostly strong throughout. Every episode was really well done. It was strong. It was engaging. So I thought it was a good series. Looking forward to season 2. And
Oh, cool.
yeah, I would recommend it. I think it doesn't spend a lot of time in Angstville, which is really good. And
Yeah.
it's got some nice surprises, got some things that are familiar again, if anyone is familiar with Greek myths. And so it was fun. It was enjoyable. And more of the Apple Plus prehistoric planet dinosaur thing, which I have mixed feelings about because I think it's fascinating what they've done and what they know and how they've learned about these animals that lived, 66 plus million years ago. On the other hand, I'm not really crazy about watching little baby creatures get eaten.
Yeah. It is interesting that even just in our lifetimes, how much more they've learned and refined the knowledge about dinosaurs in that era.
It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So are you ready to talk about Ready Player One?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Let's begin. Today we're talking about the story told in the 2018 film Ready Player One, and I'm going to read the synopsis that comes up when you type Ready Player One into Google. In 2045, the planet is on the brink of chaos and collapse, but people find salvation in the Oasis, an expansive virtual reality universe created by eccentric James Halliday. When Halliday dies, he promises his immense fortune to the first person to discover a digital Easter egg that's hidden somewhere in the Oasis. When young Wade Watts joins the contest, he finds himself becoming an unlikely hero in a reality-bending treasure hunt through a fantastical world of mystery, discovery, and danger. Did you like this movie?
Okay, first of all, this was kind of like Stardust for me, where once I started watching, I just got lost in the movie. But it's a movie that this movie felt like it was made for me. As you know, we've talked about on this podcast before in terms of my own writing and things that I like to read and watch. I love puzzles and riddles and games. So this was like right up my alley. And I also grew up during the 80s, grew up playing video games, the Atari. I played Adventure. And then, of course, I was a video game developer for a while. So, like, this is, like, very much made for me, you know? And there's so many wonderful pop culture references from his DeLorean to the Atari 2600, all the songs, Chucky, Mechagodzilla, The Shining, all these things that were in there. It's, like, so fun to see all this kind of thrown into this world. Yeah, even Buckaroo Banzai gets a mention, which I thought was funny. So I loved all of that stuff. As far as the characters and the story, I enjoyed that as well. I loved how Sorrento's avatar was just a bigger guy in a suit. It seemed so appropriate for his character. And the sequences I liked as well. It's like I loved the whole leap sequence. The leap not taken, where they have to literally leap from zombie to zombie then as they're dancing. I thought that was funny. And then, of course, the climactic sequence with all the craziness that was going on, all the different references to things, the different characters, and yeah, the way that everyone came together at the end. I thought that was a good moment. I like how it was a sort of a Willy Wonka type ending.
Yes.
You know, this sort of reference where it's like, oh, you got to prove yourself worthy of taking over my business kind of thing, right? I like that. And the extra life token that he had was such a video gamey thing from back in the day. And I liked the message that it had of, you know, living in the real world, right? I think more people could take that to heart nowadays. It seems like that's becoming almost more and more important, especially as we move towards things like this virtual reality. We've now got the Apple headset that looks like it's going to be a huge leap beyond the normal VR that people play in. Everybody's glued to their phones these days. Yeah, so I think the message is good. Take some time. Remember that you're a real person in the real world. I mean, there's just so much here that I enjoyed. I liked all the characters. I liked the twist that they had. It was a lot of fun. You know, it's not like a super deep movie that's going to change the world, but this was it's just right up my alley. What did you think of it?
I enjoyed it. Like you, I found it difficult to pull myself out of the story to make notes about the story. I remember watching this not long after it came out, and I guess I just wasn't in the right place, and I don't remember being really that. I mean, I thought it was good, and I enjoyed it, but I don't remember feeling connected to it. This time, I was like full on connected with it, like you. Like this is a story about me, for me. It's the nerds rule the world, man. I mean, it was celebrating nerddom in a huge way. And I thought that was a lot of fun. I saw the Willy Wonka elements too, though. It was like finding the keys was like finding the golden ticket, right? But you had to actually do more than just buy candy bar and unwrap it.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
and even like the Sixers reminded me of the Willy Wonka scene where the wealthy girl's dad had all these people just opening chocolate bars to find the golden ticket.
Yeah.
And the Sixers
That's
reminded
true.
me of that. The whole room full of people looking for the key reminded me of that. But to me, the really key difference here from the Willy Wonka story was that the Willy Wonka story sort of pit the individual winners against each other. And this story actually rewarded the teamwork. And it was about the teamwork, and it was encouraging the teamwork that I thought was really made it stand apart. And in some ways made it a better version of the Willy Wonka story because of that. I also really enjoyed how, we spend a lot of time in this virtual world, but then we got crossover into the real world. Now, some of that crossover felt a little convenient. Like, how is it that all these people were in the same town when you have a virtual world that draws from the whole planet? But I was willing to let that go because it worked well and it was charming. And also, I loved how you had danger in the virtual environment and danger in the real environment. So that crossover of the two environments was really well woven and made the story even more exciting. I thought that was really a lot of fun. But the thing I loved the most is the fact that this really celebrated the nerds. And you had nerds who could use their nerdness for good or for evil, right? You had the nerds who were, trying to do their best and be good people in the Oasis. And then you had the nerds who were, working for the bad guy. And both on the inside and the outside, you had a whole room full of nerds trying to figure out how to play that last game.
Yeah, it was great.
Right? And they were doing it on behalf of the bad guy. But then when the good guy won, they were cheering because it was the victory of the nerd they were celebrating, not their allegiance to the bad guy or the good guy. And I just loved that. I thought there was a wonderful blend of funny and some pathos, not much. I kind of felt like the death of the ant didn't spend that much time on it. It certainly proved that the bad guy was bad, and that seemed to be the purpose of it. But I would have liked to have had Wade be a little bit sadder about that, spend some time. We didn't really get along that well, but she was my only family. Something. Because we didn't really spend any time there in grieving this murder. But I think we just accidentally went into what we might have done differently. Sorry about that. So what would you have done differently?
Yeah, well, before we get to that, I just wanted to agree with you on your notes, especially the group dynamic. I think them working together as a team was a critical part, not only from a plot perspective of them being able to succeed, but also it was part of the message of the story, right? It's like one of the things he regretted was kind of not maintaining that partnership that he had. And and that came up again at the end. And I think having that group dynamic was so important thematically, in addition to structurally. As far as what I would improve, I felt like there's a lot of telling versus showing in the beginning. It was like, here, let me just give you explanation on how all this stuff works. I know they kind of just wanted to get the viewer up to speed. I didn't read the book, so I don't know if that's like a carryover from how the book did it. Maybe it's like similar stylistically. I don't know. And I didn't mind it the first time I watched it, but this time I was like, okay, I really feel like the story just needs to be going versus just telling us what's happening. I think they could have trusted the viewer a little bit more by putting us into the situation a little bit quicker without just outright explaining things. Not a huge deal, but it was definitely something I noticed this time around. I thought the first puzzle of having to drive the car backwards, the clue that he found was just way too obvious. Go backwards really fast, put the pedal to the metal. It's like anyone who had been studying this stuff for years after year after year, I think would have seen that pretty quickly. And if not, maybe they should have made it a bigger deal, like, there was just mountains of data to pour through and no one could get to everything. I don't know. I think now especially with AI being able to analyze data so quickly, it makes that even more ridiculous because an AI could do that like in 5 seconds. But even without that felt really obvious to me. I think they could have just left it as sometimes you have to go backwards or whatever he first said and just stopped there and let that be the clue. I think that would have been enough. But anyway, that's a minor point. Like you, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more connection with his aunt. As it was, it seemed like just someone he was living with. And he really seemed mostly unaffected by her death. It's like he was concerned running there trying to save them. And then once it was over, it was like, okay, moving on. It was kind of like the, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's death in Star Wars, or the destruction of the Death Star. It's like, right, they don't linger on the grief too much. Here, we didn't even really see that. So just a little bit more, I think, wouldn't have made that feel so strange. And then similarly, Wade saying that he was in love with Artemis felt way too quick to me. It seemed like they just knew each other virtually for like an hour at that point, right? Like, how much time had they actually spent together? If they could have suggested more time had elapsed with them working together and overcoming challenges, and usually you build a connection, and that was just so fast. It felt too quick to me. And then at the very end, near the very end, after he solves the adventure game, and then he goes into the room with the wizard there, and he has to sign the contract. I didn't really get that part where he was supposed to turn down the signature. Like, at that point, wouldn't a signed contract be expected? It's not like Wade was signing anything away, as far as we could tell. Because, like, it was the whole point was that it was just that Halliday was giving his shares to him, right? So that made sense in that context that he would sign something. If the document had been such that Wade would be agreeing never to share ownership with anyone, that would have made a lot more sense in the context of what they set up before. And it would have been like one line they could have added to the story that would have made that scene make sense for me. Again, not a huge thing, but it stood out as something that didn't quite gel right. Okay. What would you improve? What else would you improve?
There were just a couple of things that sort of stood out to me. This was a very tight, well-told story. And there was only a few moments where I was like, this is too long compared to how tight the rest of the story was. One of them was H's stumbling around the Overlook Hotel in the Shining scenes. I think they just spent way too much time on that with H. I think that could have been just shortened up a bit. I think they were trying to set up something, but it somehow, after the really good pace of everything that came before it, all of a sudden seemed to slow things down. So that was one thing I noticed. Another thing I noticed is the tattooed guy who rescued Wade and took him to Artemis. She called it the rebellion. There was no explanation of what that meant. Perhaps that's in the book, or maybe she was speaking metaphorically. But either way, she was clearly trying to hide herself and be hidden from somebody, and the tattoo guy was like too easy to spot. If this was really some kind of clandestine group, then walking around with that incredibly distinctive tattoo in a world full of drones, which everybody knows they're there, nobody seemed to be surprised by them, you would think he would just try to hide himself a little bit more. So I thought that didn't make sense to the feeling of clandestineness that was trying to be generated, but maybe I was looking too hard at that. I don't know. I also thought that Percival's speech was too long for what he was trying to do to get the Oasis citizens riled up against the bad guy. Small thing. It just felt like it went on just a little too long. And then finally, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more setup about the Oasis people and their support of Percival. Just like people in the Oasis talking about, go Percival, and, he can do it, and he's going to be the one who succeeds. we didn't really see that. So then they're all showing up to help in that great battle at the end. Seemed a little, I don't know, it just didn't seem like really everybody would just show up. So I don't know. That could just be me, but I would have loved to have seen just a little bit more setup of that. Other than that, that's it. And again, those are very small things for what was an otherwise really enjoyable story.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of those things. I think the setup at the end, you're right, for the characters supporting him or the other players supporting him. I think that was like just kind of an assumption for the viewer or the reader for the book, maybe, where it's a nerds unite moment, like you had said. It's about the nerddom, right? I think it was just kind of this assumption that they would. But you're right, a little setup there would have helped that moment be even more powerful.
Yeah.
And as far as H going through her tribulations in the Shining sequence, I agree with that. My only thought is that was setting up like the danger that was involved there, so that when we see IOI doing it and we see them dying left and right, we have an understanding of why and what was going on.
Exactly.
But you're right, it didn't need to be that long.
What do you take away from Ready Player One as a writer?
Oh, there's a lot of things. I think for me, the biggest one though is the one that is obvious and probably everyone realizes is don't underestimate the power of nostalgia, and also including loving, respectful references to pop culture, because they didn't just throw things out. It was clear like they really loved all these things that were in there. They being the initial writer, obviously, and then the makers of the film. Spielberg obviously was hugely responsible for this popular culture growing up. Not necessarily all these elements in the movie, obviously, but certainly a lot of things in that era. E.T. and Close Encounters, and Indiana Jones and Jaws, and all this stuff. It's like he had a huge effect on popular culture. So I think he really appreciated this story, which is probably why he sought to be the one to make it, because he loved that stuff, and it comes through in the story. And I think that's something that, if you have a story where that makes sense, putting some of those things, in just as, even if they're just as Easter eggs, can be fun and the readers will appreciate it.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. I like the idea of being, I like what you said about being really respectful of how you use those Easter eggs and not just throw them in, but do it in a thoughtful way. I think that's a really good point. For me, the takeaways are sort of almost like my usual stuff. Write a good story. Make sure your scenes flow from one to the next in a really logical manner, which this did. And make sure that your characters are consistent with themselves, which they all were. They were well-developed, well-defined characters that you knew who was talking, what they were going to do, what they were all about, all the time, very consistently. Yeah. So that, it's just, to me, it was just a solid story. And so I take sort of all the usual solid story lessons learned from this story.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Ready Player One. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the 2010 film, How to Train Your Dragon. Thanks a lot, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.